Good evening, everybody. Hope everyone's doing okay tonight. Last week, the week before, we started in the 17th chapter of Matthew. So tonight we're going to continue on that. We made it through the 14th verse, or the 13th verse actually, 2 weeks ago. So we're going to try to go through verses 14 through 27 tonight. But before we get too far, we start with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so very much for this time that we had to come together tonight. Thank you for the great week that you've allowed us to have so far. We thank you for your love and your mercy that we definitely do not deserve. But Father, we thank you for being with us and helping us through different situations that we face. And Father, we ask that you please allow tonight to be a good night for learning, for study. Please help us to get something out of this lesson tonight and to learn more about your word. And Father, please just help us all. Allow us to have a great night tonight and a great rest of our week. It's in your Son's holy name we pray. Amen. All right, so like I said, 2 weeks ago we got into Matthew chapter 17. And we covered the story of the Transfiguration. So I think I said it 2 weeks ago. I'll say it again tonight. We got a funny word, this transfiguration term. So can anyone recall what the transfiguration was? Maybe what the transfiguration looked like. Yes, sir. So Jesus is leading his three main disciples. We got Peter, James, and John to the top of this mountain. And that is where this transfiguration occurs. So, like he just said, that was where his outward appearance changed. And it mentions there's a lot of white, a lot of light, which we know represents purity, means it's clean. And so his outward appearance changes. And with him, there were two men that appeared. So we've got Jesus, we've got Peter, James, and John on this mountain. We've got two other men that also appeared during this transfiguration. Does anyone remember those two men? Moses and Elijah. Yes, ma'am. So we discussed the transfiguration in quite a bit of detail 2 weeks ago. And we came to the conclusion that it revealed his power and his glory. So as we know through the Gospels that they are explaining, Jesus is trying to explain who he is, that he is indeed the Messiah. He is who he has been telling everyone that he is, and he's been performing all these miracles. This transfiguration being one of those. So it is revealing his power and his glory. So that brings us to the second half of chapter 17 with verses 14 through 27. And why don't we just go ahead and read all of those verses, and then we can go one by one. So Matthew 17, 14 through 27 says, "When they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. 'Lord, have mercy on my son,' he said. 'He has seizures, and he is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him.' 'You unbelieving and perverse generation,' Jesus replied, 'how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me.' Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed at that moment. Then the disciples came to Jesus in private and asked, 'Well, why couldn't we drive it out?' He replied, 'Because you have so little faith. Truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, "Move from here to there," and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you.' When they came together in Galilee, he said to them, 'The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised to life.' And the disciples were filled with grief." After Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma temple tax came to Peter and asked, "Doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax?" "Yes, he does," he replied. When Peter came into the house, Jesus was the first to speak. "What do you think, Simon?" he asked. From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own children or from others? From others, Peter answered. Then the children are exempt, Jesus said to him. But so that we may not cause offense, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours. So we've got quite a bit going on in this second half of Matthew. And one thing that I did notice during my preparation for this lesson, and as you may have noticed before, is that Matthew isn't always quite as detailed. You look at, say, other books such as Mark, and you can have the exact same story, but Mark tends to have a little bit more detail, a little bit more context of what's going on. So you'll notice tonight that I'm going back and forth between Matthew and Mark, but obviously same story and everything like that. But the first story that we talk about tonight is this story of the demon-possessed boy. So this boy, as it says in Matthew that we just read, it says that he was dealing with seizures and he was suffering greatly. But if you go into Mark, it goes into a lot more detail. And this is the father of the boy that's speaking. He said, "Teacher," speaking to Jesus, "Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they cannot." So like I said, we have a little bit more detail on what's going on with this boy. And it's saying that there is a spirit that this boy has been possessed by. It's an evil spirit. And what do we find out about the disciples? That the father goes over to Jesus, tells him the story about his son, and he says he went to his disciples, but his disciples were unfortunately unable to heal the boy. So that's why he's going to Jesus. He's already been to the disciples, didn't really work out for him, so now he's going to Jesus to heal his son. And you know, you really have to think about this father and what he's been through. I mean, if you really think about the situation that he's in, with his son dealing with all of these issues. It says gnashing of teeth. It says that he foams at the mouth. He becomes rigid. He's convulsing. And at least I didn't see where it gave the age of this boy. So, I mean, this may have been going on for a couple of years. Not sure. But, you know, this father's probably been through it because he's desperately trying to figure out what's going on with his son. And, you know, he took him to the disciples. He's heard about these disciples, but the disciples were unable to help his son, unfortunately. And, you know, I'm sure many of us have been through instances where we've had family members that are not in the best health. And, you know, you really do feel helpless at times. Yeah, exactly. I actually had a classmate, I think I was in 7th grade, and basically 2 or 3 times a week, she would have a seizure. And, you know, you don't know what to do. You feel helpless because you see this person who's struggling, obviously, and you know, it's a really difficult situation to see someone struggling like that. But his father takes his son to Jesus. And so, going from there, Jesus tells the father that, let's see, getting all this mixed up. He brought him to the disciples, but they could not heal him. So Jesus replies, "You unbelieving and perverse generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you?" And then he says, "Bring the boy here to me." So one thing I love about teaching this class is that I always get a lot of great comments. I learn a ton from many up here, from y'all's comments. And this one part of Matthew chapter 17 kind of threw me off. And I think what threw me off the most is that we have the father that's coming over to Jesus. And I don't know if maybe it's just the the order of how this is written, but it threw me off that Jesus is saying, you perverse and unbelieving generation. So I was just wanting to get your take on that. Like, do you think there's a certain reason why Jesus would respond to this father who's bringing his son to him for healing in such a way as that?
I don't think it happened by accident. I think this is a time where Jesus could show even his disciples that he was so much more powerful than that they are, that they in fact get their strength from him, and that they must maintain their faith.
Okay. I like that. So the disciples were unable to, but it's showing, like you said, Jesus' power, that his power is even stronger than the
They
disciples.
could lose their faith, they must maintain it.
Okay.
Even the apostles. Judas did.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Does anyone else have a take on that? All right. So Jesus responds to the father, and he says, "You unbelieving and perverse generation." So he takes the boy, and Jesus rebukes the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed at that moment. So, like I said, going back to Mark, there's a little bit more conversation that Mark mentions. And one thing that the father says in Mark 9:22, he's referring back to what this demon has been doing to his son. He says, "It is often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him." And speaking to Jesus, he says, "But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." So this father is saying, if you think that you can do this, please take pity and help us out of this situation. So then Jesus responds, again in Mark 9:23. Jesus says, "If you can, everything is possible for one who believes." So we're talking about faith quite a bit right here. He's saying that anything at all is possible if you believe. So immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." And when Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. "You deaf and mute spirit," he said, "I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." So we've got this spirit finally out of this boy. And that brings us to our first discussion that I want to talk about tonight. And we've kind of touched on it already. But how would you describe the father of this boy who's been possessed by a demon? Persistent. Okay. So he didn't get the answer that he wanted with the disciples, so he goes to Jesus. So he is persistent. I'm sure. He's exhausted. He's desperate. He is feeling helpless.
Maybe he didn't have the faith that he really needed to. Maybe that's why Jesus said you unbelieving, because he asked Jesus to heal him.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of saying, Jesus healed him, he realized that he maybe didn't have enough faith.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I like that. So maybe he didn't have the faith that he needed. And he actually kind of admits that in Mark. Because he says, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief."
He loved his son a whole lot. Or he would have kept on trying to find somebody or something to heal him.
Yes,
He
ma'am.
was willing to go the extra mile for healing for his son.
Exactly.
That's why he said, help me in my unbelief.
Mm-hmm.
And some faith that he needed to. And like we do, we need to grow in faith.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm sure that there is. I'm sure everyone can agree on this, that our faith is something we always need to work on. Just like this man, and he's asking Jesus specifically to help him with his unbelief. All right, and so.
It's like you and Ashley, you can't give up. You've got to feel that some doctor's going to help her.
Mm-hmm.
You must believe that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Yeah, no, I can definitely relate to what this father's going through. Like I said, I'm sure a lot of people can. But yeah, going to doctor's offices, getting turned down, it can be frustrating. It's definitely been a test of faith. But yeah, you just have to believe that God's always with us and helping us and leading us closer to a diagnosis. So, yeah, it can definitely be tough.
He apparently knew about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Or he wouldn't have kept on pursuing, trying to find him, since the disciples couldn't heal him.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
It appears to me like I can't hear what everybody says, but this rebuke is not just to the Father, because the disciples are wanting to know, why couldn't we do this?
Mm-hmm.
Well, your problem was you didn't have enough faith. So he's rebuking his disciples, the ones that should perhaps have been able to do it,
Mm-hmm.
but they didn't have enough faith.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've brought this up before, but I can't help but wonder, like, how someone would lack that faith, like actually seeing these miracles. And I know, obviously, like I said, there's things that we can work on with our own faith, and we should definitely believe it because of what we read, of the accounts of it. But you've got these men that have witnessed this in person. But yes, he is talking to both the Father and the disciples. He's talking to the entire generation of people. Yes, sir.
I was hesitant to even ask Jesus, we as humans, we are hesitant to ask people for help because we want to be a bother.
Mm-hmm.
And he had reservations and thinking they're going to follow Jesus. So, I don't know what he thought.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I know I don't really like to ask for help as well. I can relate to that. Yeah, that's possible. Yes, ma'am. And so that brings us again to just the overall importance of having faith and constantly working on it, having the strongest faith that you can possibly have. So going back to Mark 9:23, Jesus says that everything is possible for one who believes. And he is rebuking, indeed, the faith of everyone, including the disciples. So this is where he says the famous phrase in Matthew 17:20. He says that the reason that they couldn't heal the son is because they had so little faith. And he says, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." So obviously he's taking something tiny, like a mustard seed, and he's comparing it to a great mountain. And he's saying, if you have just that much faith as small as a mustard seed, you can tell this mountain to move, and it will move. So what would you say about that? Why do you think that Jesus is comparing a mustard seed to a mountain? What is the significance of that?
They had about as much small as one of those seeds.
Yes, sir.
They don't have much faith that can do that.
So that tells you something about the faith that Jesus thought that the disciples had. You would think of a mustard seed of faith as not being much at all. But Jesus is saying, you need to have at least the faith of a mustard seed, of that much.
There was the mountain. The mountain to me represents the problems or the difficulties, and that is insurmountable. That is immaterial to the size or the amount of faith that you have.
Yes, sir.
They were new in the faith too, and they were had to grow. You can look at Peter, how Peter had to grow, and he was with the Lord daily. And these people, their faith was still not to the point where they needed to be for later on, because they're going to face some trials and tribulations.
Yes.
And their faith is going to have to sustain them. At this point, it's kind of early, and they probably don't have the faith they really need.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, their faith is pretty new. They are new Christians. And another thing on top of that is the persecutions that they could face. So I'm sure there were some reservations about, you know, do we follow this guy? You know, do we risk our lives to follow this guy and what he says? You know, he's saying that he's the Messiah. When most of society back then is not agreeing with him. You know, do we go with what society says, or do we go with what Jesus is saying? And yeah, like I said, I could see where there'd be some reservations with that, and you know, being persecuted. Obviously, we know how the story ended for these men, unfortunately. So we got this story again about faith. So Jesus has already healed the boy. He has taken the demon out of him. And he has talked with his disciples about how they need to build on their faith. That they need to have this faith of a mustard seed so that they can do anything. That he says that anything is possible for those who believe. And so there's a little bit of a side note that both Matthew and Mark mention after this story. And this is Jesus again predicting his death. So if we look at Matthew in, again, chapter 17, verse 22, it says, "When they came together in Galilee, he said to them, 'The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised to life.' And the disciples were filled with grief." And then if we look in Mark at the exact same story, it says, "They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were going because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, 'The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise.' But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it." So in both of these versions of the story, both in Matthew and Mark, one thing that stood out to me is the fact that Jesus is talking in, it's been a little bit since I've been in an English class, is it first person? Is it third person? He's referring to himself as Jesus, or the Son of Man. So he's talking about himself, but he's not saying, "I will be," or anything like that. Is there any significance that you can think of, any reason why you think he would be speaking in that kind of a manner, instead of saying, "I will be killed, I will be delivered into the hands of men"? I was thinking that in this case, you know, he's been trying to convince these disciples, he's trying to convince all these people that he is the Messiah. And so he is talking about this person who is going to be delivered into the hands of men. He is going to be killed. But he's trying to teach them that the person that he's referring to in this story is himself. And something that is a little bit different about Mark's recollection of this, is he mentions that after 3 days that he will rise. Actually, sorry, in both they do mention that. And it says, "And the disciples were filled with grief." In Mark, it says that they did not understand what he meant, and they were afraid to ask him about it. So I would think that would be a little bit tough to comprehend, that you're talking about this guy who's going to be killed, but 3 days later he's going to be raised up and he's going to be back to life. So these disciples, understandably, were very confused. Like you said earlier, that these were fairly new Christians. They're trying to build on their faith, and you've got all of this crazy stuff that's been going on. Just imagine everything that they've witnessed. So they're trying to get a grasp on everything that has been going on.
You're thinking it was going to be an earthly king, but they didn't understand it.
That's true. That's true. I did read one thing that said that perhaps they were sad that this earthly kingdom that they had been imagining wouldn't actually exist if Jesus was going to die. So yeah, that's a good point. And so, can anyone think of a reason why Jesus would again mention that he would die and be raised back to life for a second time? Because earlier in Matthew, like we talked about 2 weeks ago, he did the exact same thing. So he's done this before. So why do you think he is saying this same thing over and over again to his disciples?
I read something where one time where in the Jewish culture, if you wanted to make a point, you would repeat yourself. Like Jesus says, verily, verily, truly, truly, a lot of verses. And they said that was customary in those days to make a point. In some verses he'll say, and I say it again. And so actually it's just because of that custom, and because it was so important.
Okay. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Thank you. Awesome. So I was thinking maybe he was just trying to help them grasp what he was saying all this time. He's just trying to reiterate all of these points that he's made. But I really like what you had to say, Jay. That was really interesting.
You know, John, he asked a question later on this time. In Matthew's version, it says after he told them this, that they were exceedingly sad. So I was thinking, have you ever been in a relationship where you enjoy the company of that person so much when you're together that you really don't want to be apart? So you can think about it as maybe when you were younger, girlfriend or boyfriend that you had, you didn't want the time together apart. Just someone that you enjoy their company, enjoy the conversation, and it makes you kind of sad when it's time apart. And I really do think, because of what Ken said, they had not really realized the significance of what was about to happen. That they just like Jesus, and they just like being around him, and they didn't want him to die, they didn't want him to go away. And so this sadness, I think that would just be human nature, to be sad, when you admire someone,
Yeah. No, for sure.
be around them.
For sure. And so this brings us to the final part of Matthew 17. And this is regarding the temple tax. So it says that after Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma temple tax came to Peter and asked, "Doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax?" So Peter responds that he does indeed pay it. And one thing that's interesting about this is that Jesus seems to already know what the conversation was outside of the house. Because Peter, it says, comes into the house, and Jesus immediately starts talking about this temple tax topic. And so Jesus was the first to speak. He says, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? Do they collect it from their own children, or do they collect it from others or from strangers?" So Peter replies, "From strangers." So Jesus says, "Then the children are exempt. But so that we may not cause offense, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours." So this temple tax, from what I was able to learn about it, was kind of like a collection. It was an annual collection, and every male that was 20 and older had to pay this drachma, if I'm even saying that correctly. But they had to pay this tax, this temple tax. And what I read said that it was to sustain the temple, to help with whatever the temple was doing. And so every male, again, 20 and above, was required to pay this temple tax. And so Jesus has a very, very good question for Peter. And he says, he's asking if the kings of the earth would force their own family to pay a tax, if they would collect a tax from their family. And Peter says, no, they would have them collect the taxes from strangers, from others. You wouldn't tax your own family for anything like this. And so Jesus is referring to the temple again. This is the temple tax. And he is saying that the children are exempt. So who are the children that Jesus is referring to in this instance? What's that? The Israelites? So it seems that he's referring to the children of God, because he's saying that a king, an earthly king, would not charge his own family with any kind of tax, any kind of collection like that. And Jesus, as we know, being the Son of God, you wouldn't think that he would have to pay any kind of tax like this, any kind of, especially like a temple tax. But what's interesting is Jesus makes this point. He's telling Peter that it seems like he shouldn't have to pay anything like this, and any of the disciples, anybody that is in this family of God, should not have to pay this tax. But nonetheless, Jesus says, go out, catch a fish, first fish you catch, open its mouth, and there will be a 4 drachma coin. So that would be plenty, that'd be just enough to pay for both Peter and Jesus' tax. So despite the debate that Jesus has, and the argument that he has regarding who should have to pay this temple tax, he goes ahead and pays the tax anyways, both Peter and Jesus. So what would you say the significance of that would be? That he pays this tax even though he obviously shouldn't have to. He's not, he shouldn't be required to.
Honor him.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. But he continues to. And he says, Jesus says, but so that we may not cause offense, so that we may not cause trouble, go to the lake and catch this fish, and so that you can pay the taxes. So what do you think this would mean for us as modern day Christians? That is he saying that there's certain things that we should just kind of deal with? Or what? What would you say?
Well, there are teachings in the New Testament about obeying those who are in control of the government.
Mm-hmm.
And so if those who control the government say pay taxes, then we're obligated to pay taxes,
Mm-hmm.
whether we're fair or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure the temple tax was not a fair tax. I'm sure it was more than was needed there.
So that was actually the word I was trying to think of earlier. So that would be a 4 drachma coin, if I'm even saying that one correct. So it's a form of money, and that would equate to 4 of these drachmas. So having something that's worth 4 would pay for both Peter and for Jesus.
Seems to me the point is he has a real good argument for why he should not have to pay it. But if he made a big deal about this argument, he would cause division or problems. And so instead of doing that, he's going to just pay the tax and keep his mouth shut. And that's something we all probably need to learn how to do.
Yes, sir.
Instead of always saying, well, I gotta get my way, and I could, we need to hush.
Mm-hmm. He didn't want to cause a scene.
Cause problems.
Yes, sir.
Jesus had plenty of hills he wanted to die on, but that wasn't one of them. That wasn't a big enough deal for him to make a big deal out of it.
Mm-hmm.
There were going to be times that he didn't do what was expected of him and cause a fuss, but this wasn't a big enough deal, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I was just thinking he didn't want to cause a scene. He didn't want that to be the impression that people had of him, that he caused a scene about something as simple as a temple tax. And I agree that there are certain things that we probably shouldn't make as big of a deal as it may seem in our head. We may have the perfect argument for why we shouldn't have to do something. But, yes, exactly. Exactly. So choose your battles. Yes, ma'am.
John, as you were studying this, were
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I hadn't made that connection, but I do like that. So being free from the law of Moses. Yes, sir. And is there anything that anyone would like to add to just anything that we've discussed tonight, whether it be the transfiguration, the demon-possessed boy, this temple tax, anything like that?
What's the word that goes with the blank of your last question?
On my last question. That was the stater or stater. It's S-T-A-T-E-R. Jay, are you very familiar with that word? Had it, stater?
You said it was a what?
So that equates to 4 of these drachmas, if I'm saying that correct. So that would be enough to pay for both Peter and Jesus.
No, I don't remember. I thought it was a shekel.
Yeah, I'd never heard of that one before, but yeah. So I looked it up, and again, it would pay for both of the men for their temple tax. All right. Well, if there's no more comments, I do appreciate all of your comments as always, and thank you so much.
And I grabbed the first waterproof thing I could see. It's not always pretty shiny, but I just grabbed the first waterproof thing I could see. But it wouldn't rain. It stopped raining as soon as we got back.
So we did learn that our heart was we had been told that in Dallas before. But it was the heart on the
All right, Scott's closing the doors, so I guess it's time for us to start. All right. Trent, you have us a song for after the devotional? You're working on it. Okay, good deal. I knew you was. I knew you was working on it. Well, thank y'all all for being here. We appreciate it very much. I'm going to fill in for James on the announcements. Not any new ones, I don't think. We'll talk about a couple of things. We do have the fellowship meal scheduled Sunday. I'll come over tomorrow and Friday and see how the paint smell's going. The fellowship hall's finished, I think, but we'll just see how the paint smell. And last week, the men had their devotional in there, and after about 20 minutes, you didn't even smell paint. You just got used to it, and you didn't even smell it. And so we'll see, and I'll let y'all know on Facebook. And if you don't have Facebook, text somebody, me or somebody that might know about fellowship meal. And if you go ahead and cook something, you can bring it right down to 1121 County Road 1234, and those folks will be glad to get that. All right? All right. Let's see here. I don't have any new additions to our prayer list that I have. Today is James' birthday and Marty and James' anniversary. James did have a little day surgery Monday, and he's recovering from that, doing good as I understand it. So, and I think that's about all I have. Anybody got anything else that I might need to mention? Okay.
Jay, I don't think it was announced that Melva Shaver passed away. I know you did her service. But she was a well-known lady in this area, and that was Terry Demansky's mom.
Right, right. And so if you didn't hear Mary, Melva, and this is what I did in the funeral yesterday. Melva, Melaverne, Aunt Mel, Schaefer from Redwater passed away this week. And that's Janet's aunt and Billy's aunt, and a good Christian woman. Just a little trivia for you. You older folks will know this, but you younger folks might not, that Janet's grandma, Billy's grandma, began having church service on their porch. And that church on the porch began a congregation of the Lord's Church, and then they built a building there on that property, and that's where the church at Redwater was. And Aunt Mel has been a member of that church all these years, almost all her life. She was 93. And but she, from a good family. Terry Demansky is her daughter, if some of you get your hair done by Terry. And yes, sir, you ready?
Answer to your question.
All right, what's the number?
538.
538 in your songbooks?
Jay,
Yes, sir?
Donnie Stewart, a longtime member of the community, passed away this week, and his services are in New Boston at 2 o'clock on Saturday at Base Rock, and visitation will be 6 to 8 on Friday night.
Mark, would you text me that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right, anything else for our devotional? All right. Skylar will have our dismissal prayer after our singing. I want to tell you a story tonight. And I know most of you probably heard this story, but it's one of my favorites because the application is so easy to make. One time, there was a little monkey. And this little monkey loved bananas. Oh, he loved bananas so much. And he lived on an island, but next to that island was a smaller island. And on that island was the biggest, bestest banana tree that ever existed. It had the best bananas in the whole world. And the little monkey, he would sit on the bank and he would look over there at that banana tree and he said, oh, I wish I could have one of those good, delicious bananas off the bestest banana tree that ever was. Well, one day he was sitting there watching and looking at that tree, wishing he could have one of the bananas off the bestest banana tree in the whole wide world. And up swam
a crocodile. This wasn't just any regular crocodile. He was huge. He was long. He was like from here to the end of the building long. He was famous crocodile too. And he asked the little monkey, why are you sitting on the bank? And the little monkey said, I'm looking over there at the world's bestest bananas. No, I sure wish I could have one. The crocodile said, well, look here, I can help you. Why don't you crawl on my tail and I'll just swim you over to that island. You can have all the bananas you want. The monkey said, no, sir, I'm not going to fall for that. Said, I'm not going to get on your tail because you'll wind up eating me. The crocodile said, no, don't worry, little monkey. I've already had my lunch for today. I'm not hungry. You can ride along my tail. You'll be perfectly safe. The little monkey said, are you sure, Mr. Crocodile, you had your lunch today? Mr. Crocodile said, I'm not hungry the least little bit. And so the crocodile turned around and the little monkey crawled up on his tail and away they went across the water toward the island that had the bestest bananas in the whole wide world. As they were going along, the crocodile said, Mr. Monkey, you doing okay back there on my tail? He said, yes, sir, I'm doing fine. He said, well, look, we may be coming up on some rough water. You might ought to scoot up just a little bit further up on my back. The little monkey said, no, sir. I don't want to get up any closer to your mouth. I said, because you might eat me. He said, no, I promise you, I've already had my lunch. I'm not going to eat you. You promise, Mr. Crocodile? He said, I promise. So the little monkey, he crawled right up there and right up in the middle of that crocodile's back. And they swam on a little further. Boy, he could just see the island getting closer and that big old banana tree getting closer and the world's best bananas getting closer. And he just couldn't wait. And they just kept swimming and swimming. But then the crocodile said, you know what, we're coming up to a very deep part and sometimes I have to kind of let myself down in the water so I can swim better. Little monkey, you better crawl up here on the top of my head. Little monkey said, no, sir, I'm not crawling up on top of your head. He said, oh, don't worry, I've already had my lunch. Crawl up on my head. We don't want you to get off in the water and drown. So the little monkey, he crawled up on the crocodile's head. They were almost to the island, and he said, you know, little monkey, the waters can be kind of dangerous when we try to get up on this bank. You know, you might ought to crawl up right on the end of my nose here and be just to be safe that you don't fall off in the water and drown. The monkey said, I don't know, Mr. Crocodile. He said, you've treated me pretty good so far, but I don't know, that's awful close to your mouth. He said, Mr. Crocodile, you sure you ate your lunch today? Crocodile said, of course I ate my lunch. I'm not hungry the least little bit. The little monkey crawled up on the crocodile's nose. And they swam closer and closer to the island that had the biggest banana tree and the best bananas and the bestest bananas in the whole wide world. And the little monkey could see it. It was right there just as he could just taste those good, bestest bananas. They were almost to the island, and then all of a sudden, guess what happened? That's right, Brady. Crocodile ate him some monkey that day. Now, what's that got to do with the Bible? Well, I think the application's pretty easy. The fate of the little monkey is the same as the fate of a lot of Christians. Now, what do you mean? Because the crocodile tricked the little monkey. Satan tricks Christians. The Bible describes the devil's character, Satan's character, as that he was a sinner from the very beginning. 1 John chapter 3, verse 8. They call him the tempter in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 5. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8, he's called the lawless one. In Revelation chapter 12, verse 9, he's called the dragon, the grand deceiver. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 14, he is the master of disguise and disguises himself as an angel of light. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, he is described as our enemy, a predator, a lion, looking for someone to devour. In our little story, the little monkey, he began at the back of the tail where it was pretty safe. And then he gradually moved up forward more and more and more. And last week, Kenneth brought us a devotional about drifting from Hebrews chapter 2, verse 1. And so we need to pay attention to what God tells us so that we don't drift away. That's one of the tricks that the devil uses, is he gradually lets us participate in certain things. Just a little bit won't hurt. Maybe I could look at that just one time. Maybe I could try that one time. Maybe I could just drink that one time. But that's how the devil works. That's how the devil works. Maybe I could just not go to church one time. Maybe I could not read my Bible one day. Temptation comes in just little doses, a little bit at a time. Just like the little monkey moved gradually toward the crocodile's mouth. How can we beat the devil at his own game? We need to learn how to recognize his tricks. We need to learn how to tell that the devil is after us and he's trying to deceive us and fooling us into gradually going into sin. For we are not ignorant, Paul says, of the devil's devices. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11. James chapter 4, verse 7 says, submit to God, resist the devil, and he'll leave you alone for a little bit. And then finally, in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 11, that we are to put on the whole armor of God. Why do we do that? So that we can defend ourselves against the wiles of the devil. That's the King James Version. Or the schemes, or the tricks, or the tactics, as other versions say. Last Sunday in our basic Christianity class, we had a discussion about using our sword. In that passage in Ephesians chapter 6, the Bible, the Word of God, is described as the sword of the Spirit. And what happened if a fella gets into a sword fight and doesn't know how to use his sword? Well, I told him if that was me, I'd get my head chopped off pretty quick if I didn't know how to use a sword. And that's the way it is with the devil. We got to know how to use our weapon. We got to put on that armor. So don't let the devil fool you like the old crocodile fooled the monkey. Okay? All right. That's our devotional for this evening. Give me that number one more time.
538.
538. Let's all stand and sing our song.
Beyond this land of parting, losing and leaving, far beyond the losses, darkening this, and far beyond the taking, and the bereaving, lies the summer land of bliss, land beyond, so fair and bright, land beyond, where is no night, summer land, God is a smile, oh happy summer land of bliss, beyond this land of waiting, seeking and sighing, far beyond the sorrows, darkening this, and far beyond the pain and sickness and dying, lies the summer land of bliss, land beyond, so fair and bright, land beyond, where is no night, summer land, God is a smile, oh happy summer land of bliss. Yeah, Mr. J nailed that Devo on the head. Like temptations comes in small little doses. COVID for Chandler and I, that just missed once, you end up missing it again, and then you say you watch on the live stream. Well, boy, the fish sure do bite good in the morning times, and I'll watch the live stream in the evening. And then you'll get in, get busy, and then there'll be no live stream watching. And that's just the devil tempting a little bit at a time. But like I said last time I was up here, coming back tomorrow to help because people hold you accountable really well. But no more fishing in the mornings. 5:37. 5:37. What a song of delight in the city so bright. We'll be wrapped in this heaven fair dawn. How the ransom will raise, happy song in His praise. When all of God's singers get home. When all of God's singers get home. Wherever a sorrow will come. There is no place like home. When all of God's singers get home.
Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for you got here tonight, Lord. Lord, what we do, Lord. Lord, I ask that everyone takes this message and applies it to their life, Lord. Lord, I ask you to be with everyone on the prayer list, Lord, and be with everyone we don't know about. Lord, we're so thankful for your mercy, and we ask that you watch over us as we go up through the rest of this week. In your son's name we pray. Amen.
It rained a little.